Wait a moment. Death trap? Unstable? I put her back together myself. Yeah, she's a bit stubborn sometimes, but that was low. I shook the thoughts from my head as I walked up to the brig, as I called it. I wore a wide smile as Brass looked up from his small cot, standing up as the guard slid the barred door open before leaving us. How? His bright golden eyes looked up before he bolted at me, throwing his hooves around me in a hug. I tried to tell them that was me, but no pony believed me. I let him hang off me for a moment before straightening up. I made a deal. We have a job to do for them, I said softly, letting him collect himself. Come on. We need to gather our gear and find out what that crazy shit we're supposed to do is next. As we stopped a couple levels up for me to catch my breath, I started to wonder why in Celestia's name was this building made out of stairs. I know I'm out of shape, but for Luna's sake, they could have installed at least a single elevator somewhere. I collapsed at several more points as we were climbing, trying to catch my breath as we made our way to the middle levels of the complex. Brass was leading the way to the armory, deftly winding us through the apparently endless hallways. Finally, we ended up in a cramped room with a small metal mesh window in the back wall. A semicircle cut out of the bottom was the only clear view of the room behind it. The light-framed yellow stallion, wearing a pair of thick glasses, had his muzzle buried in a book as we approached, not even looking over as we walked up. Please sign your name, ID number, lot number, and the current time on the clipboard provided. He spoke in the dullest tone I had ever heard, and I was nearly asleep by the end of the sentence. A curious thought crept into the back of my head. There was only one other pony I knew who came close to that level of dreariness. You wouldn't happen to be related to the admissions head in 10 Pony, would you? I asked, with a small smile that shrank as he raised his eyebrows slowly and looked over at the two of us before grabbing the nearby clipboard and sliding it under the metal caged window. Don't worry, Backlash. I'll fill this out, Brass said as he levitated the pen and board next to him, angrily staring at the yellow stallion. I've done this plenty of times to know. Ouch. I could feel the tremendous amount of resentment in his words start to burn. The clerical stallion huffing slowly and not giving us another thought as he went back into his book. With the way they treated him before, and the way they carried themselves, even around each other, I'm not sure why Brass even wanted them to remember him again. Brass scribbled some things on the clipboard and floated the finished paperwork under the window again with a grunt, still keeping his eyes locked on the annoying stallion as he read through the forms on the blank look. You filed Form 23B instead of Form 23-B. I'm going to need you to redo it before I can process your request. The stallion smirked as he crumpled the paper up while watching Brass out of the corner of my eye as he started trembling with rage. I heard heavy hoof steps come up behind us. Oh, fucking give them their stuff, Milla. I came back to look at Longbow as they pressed against Brass and I out of the way. The Elder needs them at the briefing now, and you know what she'll do if she finds out you're slacking off again. Hell, you're lucky I don't report you for this violation. Her voice was cold and seemed to cut right through the window. The look on the yellow stallion was one of nervous guilt as he shrank back down in his seat. Right, Miss Longbow. He fumbled himself out of his chair and disappeared from sight behind the wall. Sorry about that. He doesn't like outsiders, the armored mare said as she pushed her long mane from her eyes, before looking down at Brass. I remember you. Yes, you belong to the East Side contingent. Bravo Company, I believe. How'd you know? Brass said as he looked at her in awe. I mean, you look familiar, but... You don't remember? She said with a little hint of disappointment. It was a little over a year ago, and I asked you to prepare some information for me. It was about the Arcanotech facility for an upcoming mission. I was supposed to brief my squad and the elders on. You spoke your mind, much to the displeasure of my superiors, and said that after reviewing the records, the risks of the automated defenses were too high and that the mission should be scrapped. Nothing else needed to be brought up. The face on the young stallion lit up as the memory came back, following along giddily as she continued. Because of your warning, not only was I the only one who came prepared for the full force defenses, I ended up dragging 2 other injured paladins back when the Star Palion decided to scrap the attempt. I remember that. Breath bounced on his hooves, looking as happy as Philly Pinkie Pie from my dreams. You told me that without my attention to detail and the courage to speak my mind, you would have died. Longbow smiled a soft smile that reminded me of Sky. Shit, speaking of, Sky was probably freaking out right about now. Longbow sighed loudly, pulling me out of my head and back to the story. Yes, and when I told you were so proud of the job you did, your cutie mark appeared. I'll always remember that day. Did you know that they made me a paladin because I saved Backblast and Cream Puff? They may not have thought it to be true, but for me, we survived because of an amazing little colt. She ruffled his green hair with her hoof as he giggled. Part of the wall hissed and slid open suddenly, making me scream and jump back nearly 5 feet. I slowly met the confused looks of Longbow and Brass as a nervous smile spread across my muzzle. Composing myself, I quickly walked over and grabbed one of the metal boxes that had rested on the pneumatic rack, attempting to pick it up with both hooves but failing, seeing as it seemed to weigh 1,000,000 fucking tons. Let me get that for you, Longbow said with a hint of snarkness, walking over and effortlessly lifting up the box, setting it on the ground next to Brass. She turned around and smiled, lifting a hoof to her forehead to give a small salute. If you need any more help, I'll be right outside. She smiled and winked at me as the sarcastic remark drew another fit of giggles from Brass, while he floated the lid off the box, revealing his black power armor. Damn cheat suits. I grumbled under my breath as I turned and yanked the other box off the shelf, half expecting to be as heavy as the first. As it turned out, it wasn't. I pulled it too far, and the box flew across the room, smacking Brass right in the head with it. He dropped to the floor with a groan and a thud. I stifled back a giggle of my own as I walked over and helped Brass back to his hooves. Sorry, I thought it was going to be heavy. It's fine. I did hospitalize you once, remember? Brass said as he smiled up, his eyes refocusing on me as he rubbed his forehead softly. But now we're even. The yellow stallion peered through the cutout section of the window. You know, you shouldn't beat children. Get back to work, Manila! Longbow yelled as she walked out, trying to contain her laughter. I had relaxed a bit after I got my gear back, triple-double checking my inventory to make sure nothing was missing before walking behind Longbow up yet another flight of stairs. After 3 flights, I flung myself onto Brass, letting his armor carry me the rest of the way, as my right hoof ached horribly. I didn't care anymore about the thoughts less of me. I'll deal with it whenever these stairs aren't trying to murder me. We turned out of the stairwell, letting out a groan as my head smacked against the doorframe. I rubbed my head as we walked into a blander-than-normal room with a single large rectangular table at the center. Took your time getting here. Maybe took a small nap? Got something to eat? Strawberry Sherbert said with an aggravated sarcasm, without even looking up from the documents spread across the table's surface. Sorry, ma'am. It won't happen again, ma'am, Longbow said as she saluted stiffly. You need to keep your staff in line, Bress said as he took off his helmet and set it on the table. They're lazy and inefficient. The elder tapped her hoof on the table before looking up and over at him. You know, if you were a pony under my command, I would lock you up for a week for that remark. She let out a soft sigh as she gathered her papers. You're straight and to the point, just like that East Sider colt. Oh, what was his name? She grinned and glared at him. It doesn't matter. I heard he was killed a few weeks ago. A shame, really. I could see Brass tense up. His eyes bore the intensity of a balefire blast as he stared across the table. The job? I raised my voice as I spoke. What is it? Brass shrugged off the anger and looked at the floor as I spoke, trying not to gaze back at the elder as she did her best to match the stare he had with an addled smile. There's a computer hidden in the underground facility on the far outskirts of Philadelphia, she said slowly. It used to be one of the computer hubs that linked all of the ministries between the great cities. I watched out of the corner of my eye as Paladin Longbow cringed as she went on. She didn't seem to like the mention of this place at all. I looked far more at her expression than she listened, seeing pain and suffering shimmer across her face in waves. You need to get to the bottom level of the facility and reconnect the server hub. The power generator should still be running, so it shouldn't be anything more than a command at a console terminal. The gray mare relaxed her gaze, looking over to me. Don't screw this up, and I will honor our deal. I nearly laughed. That's it? Just activate a terminal? Okay, Brass cut me off by raising a hoof to my chest, shaking his head slowly. This is the same facility I researched for Longbow. His gaze was stern. The first 3 levels are flooded with radiation. Well, that won't be so bad as long as we pack plenty of right-of-way. The 4th level is full of robots and automated turrets. But even then, no pony really knows what the 5th floor holds. The schematics were off limits, so you can bet that's where the real trouble is going to be. My expression sank as he continued, face-hoofing as he finished. 1 Celestia damned break. And robots! I hated fighting robots. They were the only thing that didn't run away no matter how much you shot them up. I was about to respond with a series of alarms activated throughout the base. A dark green mare ran up to the elder and whispered into her ear. It's fine. We're expecting them. Strawberry said as she pushed the mare away without a care, turning to me with the same crooked smile as before. It seems your feathered friends have finally tracked you down. You may get your things and go, but if you attempt to run, I will track you down, and Celestia help you if I find you. She turned yet again towards the blue paladin and smiled. You have advanced knowledge of the layout, and will escort them to the facility. Yes, ma'am. Longbow stuttered out, stepping back into a salute as the alarms stopped. The elder threw her hood up over herself and trotted from the room quickly, not even offering us a second glance. The 3 of us just stood for a moment in silence as the green informant mare exited after a moment as well. Longbow put her hoof back down and let out a long sigh. I'm sorry the elder's given you this task, she said with a glum look. I'll do my best to help, but if 5 of us in armor can't take it down, what chance do we have? She sat down hard as I looked at Brass and shrugged. I need to requisition some supplies downstairs. I'll meet you 2 up top. I don't care much for the chances, but I'll be damned if I don't do a job I made a deal on. I'd never be a successful trader if I skimped out on my customers. I smirked lightly and thought of all the arms I had just collected the day before. Even at 1/4 their worth, that was a fortune in caps. I nodded for Brass for us to go, looking into her eyes as we walked out. Besides, if you do make it back, they'll have to make you a star paladin, or some shit. She forced a smile before we rounded the corner to the stairwell as well. Ah, my old nemesis. Stairs. I huffed quietly before I started to climb the remaining flights up. We were met at the cave's entrance by Sky and Carlotta. Sky didn't even give me a moment to catch my breath before tackling me to the ground, hugging around my neck tightly. Honestly, even though it had only been a day, it was the best feeling in the world to have her near me again. I laughed through the gasps and hugged her back hard, only to be silenced by Carlotta a few moments later. Where's Gigantomare? Still inside? Her words forced the harsh reality back to the front of my mind. Harmony was still lying dead inside the Marauder. 42 had still murdered her, and it was still all my fault. I started, losing myself in thought. I screwed up. I pushed Sky off me and rolled to my hooves, staring at the dirt solemnly. Brass walked up and put a hoof on my shoulder. We did what we could. I looked up as he spoke, not believing a word of it, even as my brain was trying to tell me that he sounded completely sincere. 42 killed her in our escape. It was out of our hooves. Sky leaned in again and put a hoof on my other shoulder. Her expression spoke of pity, but I don't know if it was for me or for Harmony. Harmony didn't deserve this fate. She was finally free. A familiar low rumble resounded throughout the quarry as the marauder came to life for a moment before dying, letting me shrug off my companions holding me, walking towards the waiting car. I want to bury her near the garage. We have a lot of ground to cover, so we need to get going. I didn't even really register how I responded. I just wanted to get home, bury Harmony, do this job, and kill 42. Backlash, Sky said softly as I walked away. Let him go, Brass said softly. He just needs some time. How was it that in such a short period of my life, I could have made the new friends I have? And just the simple fact that Brass was willing to stand up with me and fight against 42's plan could have been enough. But even with so little time to get to know him, I cared about him, and he obviously cared about me. I assume that's why Skyline and Carlotta felt so close as well. I mean, I know the rough and tumble Griffin well enough that I can trust and value her friendship. Even with all the depth around us, and death, we give each other the strength to carry on. I walked up to the Marauder and looked inside to see Paladin Longbow sitting in the front passenger seat. She looked over to me with a shy smile and eyed Harmony's body uneasily. I had them put in 8 new spark batteries. This vehicle should be able to get us there, and have just enough to get us... get out, I said with a stern voice. Carlotta can drop you off closer to the facility. We'll meet you there. There was no way on Celestia's great earth I was going to let an active Steel Ranger know where my trade goods were stored. And I'm sure as hell not going to have Strawberry Sherbert showing up randomly to destroy my life's work. I was instructed to accompany you. It was part of the deal, she retorted with a slight amount of shock in her statement. Furthermore, I will not risk you fleeing from me with what you agreed to do for us. She whipped her mane from her face in a huff and crossed her forehooves. I got into the car and shut my door angrily. As much as I love your companionship, I can't have you telling all your little ranger friends where I store my good tech. I reached over and opened the door. I don't trust you, so get out. I yanked my hoof back inside as Skyline bucked the door closed before turning and walking up to the window next to Longbow. She looked in and eyed over the stubborn unicorn. How about this? Should you ever choose to reveal the location of our headquarters, I will personally make sure that you have a large enough bounty on your head that no pony will ever pass up the chance to kill you. Sky leaned in with a small gaze as I tried to light the ponies on fire. Got it? The paladin sat for a moment, thinking it over with a hoof to her chin. I agree. I listened as she said it, playing it over and over in my mind. It sounded genuine, so I nodded over to Sky. The satisfied Pegasus proceeded to walk over to the Sky car and, surprisingly, strapped herself in. I looked around at the window for Carlotta, only to have the rear door open. Turning around, I ended up staring at the smiling beak of the one blue-plumed griffin. So, my employer is unhappy you have me keep running errands for you. I was assigned to protect you, so I'm not supposed to leave your side, blah, blah, blah. She rolled her eyes and looked out the window as Brass got inside the perforated silver pod, closing the side door. Carlotta frowned for a moment as Sky lifted off and pulled the car up and out of sight. Anyway, I don't exactly trust the you-know-who's any further than I can throw them. So it's road trip time. Longbow looked like she was going to murder Carlotta, but forced a grin as the griffin turned to meet her with a smile. You and I are going to be the best of friends. I started up the Marauder again, listening to the thrum of the Arcanotech engine as she idled. I let the vibrations sink deep into my body before I shifted her into gear and slowly drove us out of the quarry, turning back to the road to Manhattan with a soft sigh. It would only be a couple of days, I told myself. I could handle at least 2 weeks with my friends. I could damn well handle this. Longbow struggled to keep the front seat as I left the semi-smooth road of the highway, dipping over the shoulder and into the wide-open desert. The uneven ground was bouncing us wildly, much to the joy of Carlotta laughing in the back. We had been driving for most of the afternoon, and we were now cutting across the semi-flat section of the wastes to shave a bit from our journey. The sun was just peeking below the cloud cover and glinted off the ground of the armored mare's twin sniper rifles as they bounced back. I had the radio blaring to help with the annoyingly loud noises the marauder would give when she bolted and bottomed out or drove through a pile of gravel, listening to the docile tones of Sweetie Belle as the chaos of the suspension system kept us constantly rocking. But, for as much movement as we had been doing, I was quite impressed to see that Longbow wasn't sick to her stomach. That was Sweetie Belle, singing those great times that we had with our loved ones. And now, for the news. DJ Pon-3's soothing voice came through the radio over the scrapes and bumps without losing much of its quality. First, some bad news. My trusted source can personally confirm the reports that citizens of Winey were inside the Sugar Apple Bombs factory at the time of the explosion, and has the proof that the pink mare was behind the fiendish action. I scrunched up my muzzle for a second before frowning, the memories of the last few days flooding my mind. I could see the pose of each victim clearly in my head, their heads, each with a hole bored through them. Now for the good news. You remember that recently I mentioned a troublesome rock gang was plaguing all settlements in Ponyville area? Well, worry no more. That's right, my little ponies. The rock gang is no more, thanks to the heroic actions of the ponies going after the notorious pink mare. DJ Pon-3 had such pride in his voice. The admiration he bestowed was denoting many emotions, but pride drowned them all out. I didn't know what to think about it. I mean, I've always wanted to be the wasteland's most famous trader, but at the cost 42 has been imposing, it's not going to be worth it. In other interesting news, New Appaloosa has repaired the train line, but Longbow shut the radio off before a particularly strong bounce sent her to the floor with a grunt and a thud. She struggled to get to her hooves as Carlotta burst into hysterical laughter and fell onto the floor on the back. "Just stay down there," I yelled over the obnoxiously loud noise of dirt and sand were making, doing my best to keep the marauders steady on the rough terrain. "We're almost there. Just another minute." The shock absorbers and leaf springs groaned as I sped up, bouncing higher as we screamed towards the flat section of the highway in front of us. With a final lurch and a loud slam, we careened over the large dune at the edge of the old highway. We rolled to a stop before lining the car back up in the correct direction, sighing as I sat back and put the car into park, turning off the engine to give us a small break. In hindsight, I realized that by taking the brake, we didn't really save any time at all. Longbow scrambled to open her door, covering her muzzle with a hoof as she finally unlatched it, clambering a few feet back up the dune before I could hear her throwing up. Carlotta pulled herself back up from the floor, drooping and panting over the seat as she caught her breath from her incessant giggles over the unsteady paladin. "Honestly, I was surprised she lasted that long," I said with a smirk. "You should have seen Brass." "So I get that ground ponies aren't used to bouncing or rocking around so much," she said with a slightly raised eyebrow. "So why didn't you get sick?" Traversing the wasteland with a cart full of wares and a partner means you eventually get a turn in sleep with the back, I said with a small amount of pride while shrugging. "You eventually get used to it." "Hey!" Carlotta and I turned in unison as Longbow called out from the dune. "Stop where you are!" I was amazed that by the time we were glancing in the direction she was calling out from, she had taken off a good 200 feet in a gallop, screaming off into the evening desert behind us. As I groaned and opened my door, a small twinge in my back jolted my eyes up opposite side of the roadway, as a flash on the rock maybe 100 yards away reflected the setting sun behind me. I ducked behind the door, using it for cover as the sniper took shot after shot at the old rusted steel door. I could hear the rounds thunk against the old phone books I had crammed into the frames as Carlotta climbed out of the other side of the car. "Carlotta, I could use some help." I did my best to scream over the deafening cracks from the hidden gun pony. I slid into sats and felt the world crawl to a stop, and for some reason I could see the outline of the hidden sniper stallion through both the door frame and the rocks he was using for cover. I had a 0% chance to hit him from my current position, From what I saw, there was too much open ground to cover for me to even attempt to use anything but the party cannon. I pulled the menu up and equipped the party cannon before canceling the targeting spell. The bulky weapon flashed into my grip as time sped back to normal. The enormous pink gun immediately, jerking around, bounced off my side. It was just too bulky of a weapon to use effectively from cover, I guess. I heard a short, controlled bursts from where Carlotta laid down fire as she flew past, giving me a short window to get up and out and take the sniper out. I rose to my hind hooves and out of the safety of the car door, popping the pink gun on the door frame as the sniper himself recovered from the aerial pass. I fired first, too hastily and too aimed at the shot high, sending the large spherical ball into the boulder beside him, nearly splitting it down the middle as the ball bounced up and over it, disappearing into the dunes a fair ways back. He seemed stunned for a moment before squeezing off his own shot. I was thrown back by the sheer impact against my chest, pain immediately lancing through me as I fell to the ground with a gasp. I looked down to see the .308 armor-piercing round lodged partway through one of the plates in my flak chest, leaving a half an inch deep, bruised and bleeding hole in my chest. I gasped for air, listening as I heard Carlotta swooping by her with a battle saddle, pounding round after round at the sniping pony. I dropped the party cannon and got to my hooves slowly, as I thanked Celestia for this armor, keeping my head down behind the car door. I listened as the sniper pony screamed out, the .308 rounds from Carlotta's twin rifles puncturing large holes in him. For a minute there was nothing but silence. I scanned the skies around me, trying to find where my griffin buddy had gotten to, but my gaze was drawn towards the sudden sound of gunfire in the dunes on the other side of the car. I quickly tracked it down and ducked behind the marauder, crawling my way through, keeping low on my hooves as I dropped out the other side. I peered up over the shallow dune we had driven over to see a group of 3, maybe 4, well-armed slavers cowering behind an empty caged cart, maybe 100 yards away. The longbow had moved from a rock she was behind and was walking forward slowly, firing and alternating shots from her sniper rifles, letting the rounds ping off of the metal wagon. I grinned and knew I could finish this quickly. I raised my hoof to line up a shot with the party cannon, only to remember it was still sitting on the ground beside the driver's side car. Fuck! I yelled as a shower of submarine gun fire erupted from behind the wagon, thumping against the dune in front of me as I dropped down and cringed. Not the smartest idea, Backlash, I said to myself as I lay in the sand. My ears perked as Carlotta strafed the wagon. A set of yelps and screams erupted between the slow chugging of automatic guns. After a few moments, I heard the pair of loud cracks as Longbow's sniper rifles, before the screams drifted off into the distance with the echoes of gunfire. I peeked up over the dune to see Carlotta busily stripping the corpses as Longbow opened the empty cage, peering inside with a distraught look on her eyes. I winced as I brushed the sand and dirt off my wound, before trotting over to her, looking in with her to see what made her so damn horrified. The decapitated bodies of 3 colts and 4 fillies lay amongst the chunks of meat and bone on the floor of the cart, the charred metal remains of collars being the only hints as to how those innocent lives were lost. I turned and lurched forward, kneeling in the dirt before I threw up. The sight of the headless foals struck imprinted into my mind, searing deep into all of its horrible detail. I groaned and heaved again, causing me to lose my balance and flop into the dirt. Fucking foals! I coughed out as I writhed in pain. What good were they as slaves? They were innocent! Carlotta poked her head around the cage, seemingly unfazed. It used to be an honorable trade, allowing ponies to put the criminals of the wasteland to work, rebuilding rail lines and settlements. But after a few more years, more criminals started getting killed in gunfights or accidents while in custody, and they had to resort to other means to get workers. She spoke as if they were common knowledge, which scared the hell out of me. Had I been this ignorant of the way that the wasteland worked? I remember the last time that I traded with the slavers, with a couple of syringes of Med-X and a half-full box of 9mm ammo in exchange for me fixing up his collars. And that was 3 years ago. But I remember hooking the primers to the directed explosive charges, fixing the radio control board so it would go reliably off. To me, the collars were just another item to fix, just another job. What if one of these collars was used in that cage? What if I used my special talent that day to ensure the death of one of these colts or fillies? I rolled over on the dirt and heaved again, coughing hard and having nothing left to bring up. I'm sorry, little ones. Longbow said softly, her eyes shut. Her voice was filled with regret. I couldn't save you, but I could at least bring you justice to the ones that stole your lives. I watched as she kneeled in reverence. Celestia and Luna, I pray that you will find it in your heart to help these souls of the ponies find peace with you. Please guide them all safely to the everlasting meadows of the afterlife. She was praying. I had never seen anyone in my travels pray openly, let alone sound so devoted to the goddesses of the old world as the blue mare before me did. I could almost feel that she thought she was speaking directly to them, as if they could answer her, if she only spoke as reverently as she did. You pray for them, I said slowly, as I wiped the sick from my muzzle. For all of them? She opened her blue eyes slowly, giving a soft nod as she got back to her hooves. It is only my place to judge one's deeds in this life. She stomped her hoof down, scooping some dirt away as she pulled it back. Once the soul is departed, it's up to Celestia and Luna to decide where they ultimately go. She scooped up another hooful of dirt as she talked. She was digging, and I needed to help. I walked solemnly beside her and scooped away another line, listening as she stopped for a moment and looked at me. I could feel her curious gaze as I scooped another hooful of dirt away, the flutter of Carlotta's wings making me look up for a moment. The clang of a set of shovels in the dirt broke the sudden evening air silence as the row of now red-setting sun glinted off the plating of Longbow's armor. I thought you might be dead by the time we got back to the farm, so I grabbed these before we came got you, Carlotta said as she tried fruitlessly to lighten the mood, watching as the blue aura enveloped the two shovels and swung one around the other. I took it in my mouth and started to dig alongside the silent unicorn. Soon Carlotta was dragging the bodies of the slavers over as we dug the mass grave, the wind singing its low drones as we all worked together to put them to rest. I couldn't help but think that as we dug, it wasn't fair for the fools to be buried with their murderers, that they deserved somewhere nicer than a shallow grave off the highway. But it wasn't that also the case for the innocent ponies of Ponyville, or Whiny? Hell, I was going to bury Harmony near the garage when I got back. I'd only known her for not even 2 days before she died, yet I wanted to give her special treatment. And that, even though I knew it was wrong, why was I okay with it?